Indians would be circling around, all of the cavalry would be dead, but there in buckskin in the middle of the hilltop would be Custer, fighting off the last of the Indians, the last man to die. And that was our image of the Battle of the Little Bighorn for generations, because we didn't know any better. But battlefield archaeology, I'm a old-fashioned historian who deals in paper and ink, but battlefield archaeology taught us an entirely different story suddenly a generation ago of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Custer didn't die on the hilltop like Budweiser taught us he did. He died somewhere further away and right at the beginning of the battle. And the whole story is different because the physical evidence told us the story of the battle in ways that a generation ago we could scarcely imagine dropped bits and arrowheads and bullets could teach us. One of the most exciting things going on in American history today is battlefield preservation. And it's not just because battlefields are outdoor classrooms where people can come to learn about the Civil War and the American Revolutionary War and our other wars, but because they are archives, they are physical resources in which it's possible to use to reconstruct the stories of the greatest events in American history, which is what brings us to here tonight. We are revolutionaries. I know we don't look like revolutionaries. Look at the person next to you. They don't look very radical. None of us are in our best Che Guevara outfits, but we are the products of the most radical revolution of modern times, the American Revolution, which articulated ideas of human freedom which are changing the world. And on April the 19th, 1775, that Revolutionary War began. And I think of it beginning in that great American way where people stood up and they said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore. And they took their guns in their hands and they went out and they fought. And they fought at Lexington, sort of, and they fought at Concord, definitely. But mainly on that day, that April the 19th, 1775, they fought the British as they retreated from Concord back to Boston along what has since been known as the Battle Road. And one of the places that they fought has since been known as Parker's Revenge. And so it was very exciting a year or so ago when our organization, the Society of the Cincinnati, with our partners, the Civil War Trust, who are our great leaders in the field of battlefield preservation, one of the great historical organizations in the history of our country, said, let's get together and help underwrite some of the work being done in battlefield archaeology at Parker's Revenge to really understand what happened at that place. We jumped on board. We were delighted to do it. It's very exciting to be a part of something which is finding out new things. It's possible to find out new things about something as, to many of us, as sort of hackneyed as the 19th of April in 75. You know, we all remember the poems. We think there's nothing more to be learned, but there is. And Dr. Meg Watters, who is the lead investigator, is here to tell us about what she and her team discovered in their months of work on the site at Parker's Revenge. Now, the reason we invited Meg is not because of her lengthy list of distinguished sounding degrees. She has a degree in classics from Trinity College, which is really great because I can say that without looking at my notes. But I have to pull out my notes and then my glasses for this to tell you that she has a PhD in, get this is lovely, new methods for archaeogeophysical data visualization. If you can say that real quickly, all this means is that she's really smart, but that's really not the point tonight. She's actually not only really smart, but she's got a great story to tell, and she's extremely entertaining telling it. Which means that you've come to the right place tonight. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Dr. Meg Watters.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. Bob Morris, who is the head of our Friends group, after 2.5 years of working together with us, when he introduces me, says that he just can't pronounce all the stuff that I do, but that he'll let me explain it. So I'll go easy on you guys tonight, though. I'll just gloss over some of the higher tech things. But no, this project is a very integrated project with many technologies, many standard and traditional archaeological methodologies, and many people who've made it possible. And in particular, I very much would like to thank the Society of Cincinnati and the Civil War Trust Campaign 1776 for their very generous and strong support of the project, and in particular the archaeology. Because the archaeology that we're doing at Parker's Revenge is revealing new information. It is adding new information and adding a new chapter to the history of this battle on the first day of the American Revolution. Too close to that. So, on April 19th, 1775, early in the morning, Captain John Parker and the Lexington Militia assembled on the Lexington Green. They knew, of course, Paul Revere came through and some others, warning them that the British were coming out to Concord to capture munitions and capture arms and cannon that they knew were being amassed in Concord and in other towns, and at the Barrett Farm, which is actually another place just past the North Bridge in Concord. And they awaited the British column of regulars to come, and it didn't take long after they were assembled when the British column came out along Bay Road, or as we know it now, Old Battle Road, and came face to face with the Lexington Militia. Now, this is not an unusual sight. The town militias gathered weekly, and they drilled, and on a number of occasions, for instance, up in Salem, militias have been present when British troops have been present. The Parker's men were not blocking the road. They were not standing in any aggressive stances. They were just standing there doing their job on the Lexington Green that morning. We don't know who, but someone shot off a gun, a musket, and in the end, 8 of the Lexington militiamen were dead and 12 were wounded, and the British carried on to Concord. There we go. And this is a wonderful engraving by Amos Doolittle. He was on the battlefield and in that area from Connecticut a few months after this occurred. After the British column left the Lexington Green, they traveled on to the North Bridge. And what's important to think about is let's think about the Lexington Militia for a minute. There were maybe 77 men out there. We don't know exactly how many were there in the morning. 8 were killed and 12 were injured. That's a large percentage of their militia. That's a large percentage of the town of Lexington. Everyone knew who was killed or injured in that town. Everyone was either related or they were friends. So the town of Lexington and the Lexington Militia, they tended to their wounded and they tended to their dead. And then the leader that he was, Captain John Parker, who had been in the French and Indian War previously, he led his men. He rallied his men, and they went out to wait at the border between the towns of Lexington and Lincoln on the Old Bay Road. So after the North Bridge and the fighting that ensued there, which is a completely different talk that I'm not going to give this evening because we'd be here forever, right? The British retreated from Concord. And the first real fire, the real and lasting fire from the colonists came at Miriam's Corner, where there was a bridge, where it was a crossroads, a strategic place in the landscape. And the firing continued and increased in volume as they came to Bloody Angle, which is a strategic point in the landscape where the road takes a nearly 90-degree turn. And in that day, there were orchards on both sides of the road. And after the Bloody Angle, we have Parker's Revenge. And we have a battle here that we know of through historical documentation, through primary sources, through writing of the men that fought there. And then just after Parker's Revenge, we had 2 other small skirmishes at what we're calling now the Bloody Bluff and at Fisk Hill. So this is the fighting that we saw in the area of the Minuteman National Park. Why Parker's Revenge? Right, I just put 5 different little skirmishes up there and fights. Why not the North Bridge? Well, Parker's Revenge is very special because they faced the British earlier that morning, and they suffered casualties. And those were the first men who died in the Revolutionary War, in our American Revolution. And this project is really is targeting those men, is giving a voice to those men, and all of the men and people who fought that first day and for the rest of the war. It also strategically brings Lexington more into the park. While you may not live in the area, the Minuteman National Park seems to be focused more in Concord, around the North Bridge, you know, the shot heard round the world. But in fact, what we're doing with the research in the Minuteman Park is really defining all of the important battles and all the important places and all of the people who participated in that first day. And as Bob Morris, the head of the Friends, has said many, many times, you know, Parker's Revenge is one example of many of the heroism and the bravery on that day when these men were committing treason. These British citizens were taking up arms against their king, and that's no small thing. So the project, what a project. It's been over 2 years now that I've been working with it, completely immersed in the work that we're doing, but with all of the organizations that we're working with. And it begins with the Minuteman National Historical Park. This is their park, this is their agenda. They are looking to learn more about what happened on that day and are turning to archaeology to help uncover and discover new clues that we can use to better tell the story of that first day of the war. The project is supported by the Friends of the Minuteman National Park and is managed by the Friends of the Park. They're doing all the fundraising, they're doing all the outreach to the communities around the park. And we're also working with the regional Archaeology Division of the National Park Service that's based up in Lowell, about half an hour away. And they've been a great resource not only for the planning of the project methodology-wise with archaeology, but also with the resources we've been able to use and the folks they've actually sent down to work with us in many of the different things we've done in the field. And everyone in this project is very important and has a very important role to play. But I think for me, the very special component of this project are the volunteers and the groups we've been able to involve in the work so they can get their hands on it and they can get excited about it. And we have a core group of volunteers that you'll see in some of these subsequent slides that have been with me every step of the way for these past 2 years in all of the field work we've done. We've shared a lot of dirt and poison ivy and tick bites together. So, Parker's Revenge Archaeological Project. This was born around 2010 as an idea between some of the volunteers and the Friends group and the park, and it grew into this project. And they brought me on board 2 years ago, and we put together a research plan, and we wanted to find out, one, where was the Parker's Revenge battle? We don't know where it was. Historically, it was at the border of Lincoln and Lexington, on the old Bay Road, but we don't know exactly where in that landscape it is. Two, can we find evidence that gives us information on the action? What tactics were employed by the British or by the colonists? Can we learn any kind of information about that? Because there's nothing written about that in the primary documentation for that first day of the war. So I have not been involved in battlefield archaeology personally before. I'm aware of it. I have colleagues who do battlefield archaeology, but I was super excited to get involved, and boy, I did not know what I had ahead of me. But it's been wonderful, partly because everyone I've reached out to has contributed back to the project and has provided information and provided resources and helped guide our group of volunteers and other people involved in the project toward the end that we reached only 2.5 weeks ago. So in archaeological projects, we always have a research design. Right? What's our hypothesis? What questions are we looking to answer? And what methods are we going to employ to answer those questions? So the first thing, kind of broad scope with this project, is using the National Park Service's American Battlefield Protection Program approach, which is used across the US and also internationally in battlefield archaeology, which the acronym says COCOA, and it's basically looking at the landscape, looking at how people would strategically employ different components of that landscape. Woods, rocks, buildings, ditches, that type of thing. How would you move around that landscape, around all of those features, to best achieve your goals, which are, in this case, to, basically either stop the British column on behalf of the colonists, or for the British column to sweep the colonists away so that they don't impact the British column in its retreat back to Boston. So in archaeology, we like to start in the archives. We like to start with the history. We like to start with the known. So a lot of our research began in the archives, looking at the old maps, looking at the old deeds, land transfers, tax records. It's wonderful. Concord, Lexington, Lincoln, Massachusetts, they have amazing archives. But we also go out in the field, of course, as archaeologists, to try to discover what may be remaining in the ground that is going to provide us information. So we look at the landscape on the surface, but we also, of course, like to excavate to try to dig up what's buried to again, give us this information. All of this information, I have tons. I'm not going to tell you everything because, again, we'd be here forever. But I have all sorts of information. I have old maps, very old, 1700s maps. I have aerial photographs dating back to the very beginning of the 1900s, all these tax records, landscape information, hydrology information, all that type of thing. I organize it in a program called GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And this is a spatial data management tool. So anything that I can put on a map, any spatial information I can put into this system, and I can relate it to each other. But what I love about this in this project is I can also put temporal information in. So I can look at space and I can look at time, and I can peel back the layers from 2015 back to 1775 to build our base from which to conduct our investigations. And the archaeological component of the Parker's Revenge project is the first component. It will underlie the second and third, which is a development of outreach and interpretive materials and resources for the park to use with visitors to the park, but also specific STEM programming, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, for education with youth in the schools and the schools that come to the park itself. And I happen to be really excited about STEM, and I've done a lot of work with STEM in the past. So I worked with the interpreter of the park before we even started, and I said, this is what we're going to do. What can I give to you? What can I provide to you so that in 2 or 3 years' time, when you're doing all your programming, you've got what you need? So from the very beginning, we were really working together. And I'm really excited about this. This phase is coming. It's starting in January. So here we go. Reconstructing the historical landscape. This is an aerial photograph from 1930. And our study area, this is the Minuteman National Park boundary, that red line. This is our study area. It encompasses about 45 to 70 acres, depending on how I walk across the landscape that day and what I'm looking at. And you can see there's some wooded area up here, and the rest is pretty much farmed down in here. This is all clear. We can skip to the 1960s, and some of those trees are starting to fill in areas, but what you can see here is the beginning of the development of Hanscom Air Force Base. And Hanscom abuts the park directly, and they built a giant road right through the middle of the site. Yay! And you know, as it happens, it was in 1942. The park did not acquire the land until the late 1950s, early 1960s. And then we have Route 2A down here, which I think it was in the 1920s, 1930s, was formalized. And culverts were built, and the road was paved over. And the culverts weren't put really hydrologically in the right places with the building of Hanscom Air Force Base and the position geologically in the landscape where our study area is. We have the beginning of a development of a wetland that comes also right through the middle of our project area. And also in the 1960s, so when the park purchased this property, all of those orange spots up there are buildings, houses, garages. This was a veterinarian's clinic here. This is the core area of our study area, and there were houses here with garages and chicken coops, and we have an old barbecue and patio way back up in the woods. And today, this is what the park looks like. The park actually removed hundreds of buildings in the 1960s. Turn the landscape back to more realistically represent what would have been there if you were walking down or riding down the old Bay Road in 1775. This is the visitor center here, and this is a historic building, also historic. In my research, of course, I've done a lot of work looking at the core area, the focus area of inside that yellow circle. And we know that Thomas Nelson, he's a senior, Thomas Nelson purchased property there in the 1720s. Thomas Nelson had twins, Tabitha and Thomas Jr. He and Tabitha lived together until first he died and then she died. She never married. And Thomas Nelson Jr. lived just next door. And we know that there was a barn, we know that there was a house, there certainly wasn't a privy or an outhouse, and potentially other outbuildings. Now we know this is in the core area of our study area, but it's not on the ground anymore. So these are things that, as an archaeologist, I'd like to find, because these are going to be obstacles in that landscape. These are going to be something that are going to potentially be used tactically by the British or the colonists. So for me to discover this tactical, using the COCOA approach to looking at a battlefield, I need to establish what was this landscape, how were people using it, and what structures were on the landscape. This is a wonderful map that was made in 1758 and copied over again, as you can see here, in 1772, that shows the boundary between Lincoln and Lexington. And this is the old Bay Road coming through here, and then of course, it stops at Lexington, which is where we believe the battle was. But what's really great about this map is it says there was a bridge here. And this, for me, is really exciting because at Miriam's Corner and at Bloody Angle, we had bridges, and bridges are somewhere that are constraining, that troops have to go over or around. So again, we're getting this tactical information from the historic documentation. Of course, I have to put it on the map, so that's a little tricky sometimes. Tabitha Nelson's house. We know her house was there, but we don't know exactly where it was. Excavations were done in the 1960s when the park was going through a lot of development, well, taking buildings down and exploration of what resources they have. And one of the archaeologists in the 1960s found what he interpreted as Tabitha Nelson's house, but he never mapped it. So generally we knew where it was, but we couldn't put our finger on it. And that was another goal of this project, is to put that house on the map. We know in this photograph that Tabitha Nelson's house was attached to her brother's. After she died, her brother sold the house to his son-in-law, and they moved it and attached it to the original house. So we actually have evidence from excavations, because this is no longer here, we have evidence from excavations in 1968 of the actual dimensions of the house. So if we're able to find any foundations of that structure in situ, or in the position where it originally was, we can begin to rebuild what would have been there. Right, so we had a bit of an audio issue here. This is a transition from that introduction in the archives to going out to the field, and this shows the Lexington Minutemen out clearing the site. We were doing a series of geophysical surveys, which is a technique to look underground without digging. And I actually specialize in geophysical surveys. I use ground-penetrating radar, conductivity, resistivity, those types of things to actually image what's buried underground. Hopefully stone foundations, compacted earthen surfaces, that type of thing. So as you can see here, we had probably, 20 folks out for 3 weekends, Saturday and Sunday, a year ago, and they cleared all of this new growth. Not many trees. We didn't have to take trees out, but all of this underbrush out. in order to clear that site itself. So this is a really good example of new growth woods. New England, many other places in the US, but New England in particular is well known for its new growth. We actually know from documentation that this whole area was meadows, pastures, English mowing, orchards. It was a very groomed landscape, not kind of the wild woods that it is today. Oh, well, that was pretty good. Wow. That's the first time I've done that. Excellent. So, because I have a PhD in new methods in geophysical data visualization, I can't even say it, right? I love to employ relevant methodologies and technologies. So in order to actually know where the house foundation was, where the barn was, we would have to excavate. But as archaeologists kind of across the board, we don't like to go out and just dig stuff up without, with only saying, well, I think it might be over here, let's dig it up. So what I like to do is employ a suite of tools. I like to employ the geophysical surveys that we talked about, or that I just mentioned, 3D laser scanning, which is a really great technology that my husband actually happens to do, which is kind of cool. He does all the above ground 3D, and I do all the below ground 3D. It works. We stay out of each other's way in doing it. We also employed metal detecting surveys, metallic surveys, and of course excavation for recovery. So 3D laser scanning, right? We have aerial 3D laser scanning run from an airplane. It's called LiDAR data, light and distance recording. It's amazing. Millions upon millions and millions of points of data that give us a distance. That's what I'm looking for archaeology. But if you're into forestry, it gives you a ton of more information. Again, that's another whole talk I could do. But what we were looking to do is get a really high resolution map of our site. Well, what it gives us is millions and millions of points of data to recreate that area that was scanned in 3 dimensions. This gives us an idea of from the British vantage point, the British regular column, of coming up or coming down Bay Road back toward Boston. And they're coming here. This is a granite outcrop right here, a strategic point in the landscape, right along Old Battle Road, and we're coming right up on top of it. This rock is actually marked in the park today as the Parker's Revenge battle site. But it might not be, which I'll show you in the end. It's not, at least from what our evidence says. So for one, this is a great visual, right? It's great. We could put it on the computer. You could fly around it if you wanted to. You have access for people who are not able to access the site physically, or who are too far away, or just want to study the area and have a look around. Well, for me, the big data person, we can strip all those trees away. We can strip all that junk away that we were flying through and create what's called a bare earth model. This is a very high resolution, 3-dimensional model of the terrain of that landscape. And in it, you can see Battle Road, well, an airport road, of course, right through the middle. That granite outcrop that we flew up to and turned around on. And we can see an old historic track, the stone wall. We know this was cultivated field. Drainage right here. We know this is a geological feature called a seep feature, so we know that it was an intermittent drainage feature, so it was wet seasonally, which is important if you think about the battle on April 19th, 1775. Geological, we know it's there, it wasn't man-made, which is great, because everything I have to kind of guess about, is this an old wall, or is it, 1800s wall, that type of thing. But we also have experts on stone walls who've been out with us to help us with our interpretations. And Tabitha Nelson's house is located right here. So this will be the base for my modeling. So when I get into all my computer stuff, and all this information that we've collected, all the data we've collected, I can use this to do simulations of how people might go across that landscape, how musket balls might fly, what you can see, what you can't see from different vantage points. So this is just a picture of those geophysical methods that we employed on site. And we've got Bill Rose here, who's one of our volunteers, and he literally has been, if I give him he's retired, I give him a call, hey, I'm going to go out and clip some bushes on site. He's like, all right, I'll be out there by 9. You know, it's awesome. So I always have someone on site, which is great. Bill Griswold, he is one of the regional archaeologists from the Northeast Regional Office in Lowell, and he came down and did the whole geophysical survey with us. He's got a conductivity meter that also does magnetic susceptibility. This is flux gate gradiometry that I'm doing, and this is ground penetrating radar. Again, looking for stuff buried in the ground that would be relevant to that battle. And we ground truthed. So we had targets in that data that we collected, and we worked with a group called the Public Archaeology Lab. They are cultural resource management professionals or professional archaeologists. And we came right down on top of the corner of the Tabitha Nelson house, right here. So we were able to check off, we found the house, and we put it on the map. That's the really important thing, is putting it on the map. We knew it was there somewhere, but now we know exactly where it was, and then we can start using that in our model for that battlefield archaeology simulation and interpretation. And also, importantly, that's Ed Hurley and Corinne Rose, and they're both volunteers. So again, we're able to get lots of work done because we had this great group of volunteers that came and participated, but not just participated, learned about all of these technologies, learned about archaeology and the methodology, learned about why archaeologists are like, no, you really shouldn't just dig by yourself on a site, but come work with us and we'll kind of show you how we look at things, how we collect things. It's been a really great process. So we've built up the historic landscape of April 19th, 1775. But now, right, we're looking for that battle. Physical evidence. What type of physical evidence is going to give us an idea of where a battle might be, where people might have been standing and firing? Right? Can we put that person back in the landscape? And for that, we're engaging metal detecting. And the reference to Custer's Last Stand, the Battle of Little Bighorn, we brought Doug Scott, who did all of that work, Dr. Doug Scott, who's one of the world-leading conflict archaeologists, out to work with us. I happen to know him, and I gave him a call. I'm like, hey, Doug, I'm working on the first day of the Revolutionary War. Would you come out and work with us and train our volunteers, because we want them to be finding this stuff and learning about archaeology and learning about our methodologies because they're so passionate about it. So he came out, and some other folks came out and helped train us. We had 3 weeks of metallic surveys. One was last year in November, one was in June this year, and one was a month ago. We had our final week beginning November 9th. It's crazy how much time has not passed since then. And it's not just swinging your metal detector on a beach and picking up some coins, right? There's a very specific archaeological methodology that we use. First, you have to learn how to use the machine, how to use the different settings, how to filter out all the background junk, because our site is covered in junk. We have houses from the 20th century that were torn down in the 1960s, and all their junk is there. We had historic farmstead that was occupied from 1775 to the 1960s. Trash, nails, flashing, lead flashing from chimneys, chicken wire. Oh, and the Air Force fence line used to go through the middle of the site, and they removed it about 6 years ago. But there's a lot of fence still in tiny little pieces in the ground, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tiny little pieces of fence, which are great iron signals in the metal detector. So we really had to learn how to listen around all of that, to pull out that lead musket ball, to pull out that copper button or the coins. Methodology, I always hone on about methodology. There's a very specific way that I, as an archaeologist, look at a site, and that's as a grid in quadrants. In studying battlefields archaeology, many people do a sampling of a site because to cover the whole site would be too much time, too much money, not enough resources. But I kept coming back to, I want to cover the whole site. I really want to cover 40 to 45 acres because if we don't cover it, we don't know. And I kept coming back to that. And so I worked really hard with Doug Scott and some of the other folks and our volunteers on planning out how we were going to do the survey, where we were going to cover, if we were going to do lanes, which is literally putting ropes down, creating a lane that you cover 100%, or just walking across the landscape. And we did a combination of all of that, and it changed and adapted to each area of the site that we were in. Also with our methodology, we always had, this is Eric Fahey, he's from the professional archaeology company that worked with us and helped us develop the archaeological recording side of our project. And he was with us, or another of their staff, on all three of our metallic surveys. But you'll see here, these are all the volunteers who are doing the metal detecting, who are doing the retrieving of objects. We learned how to dig them up. They learned this whole process. And by the end, they even went as far as, which is awesome for me because I'd love to use them in the future, they do all the paperwork themselves now, right? Because in archaeology, you don't just dig something out of the ground and go, oh yeah, look, a musket ball. That's awesome. You say, oh look, it's a musket ball. I got it here. This is what its readings were. This is how deep it was in the ground, right? And the characteristics. So we have to be very thoughtful and methodological in a very exciting time when we're actually pulling things out of the ground. And boy, did we pull things out of the ground. These are all musket balls. The musket balls were all found by our 5 core volunteers that worked with us. Ed Hurley, Bill Rose, Joel Bowie, and Corinne Rose. We have one more, Bill Poole, who's not on this slide because I couldn't fit all 5 on. And these are some of the musket balls that we found. This one ricocheted off of a rock. You see that? That's a chunk. It just went against the rock, fell in the ground. They dug it up and they're like, huh, oh, look at that. It came from this rock, right? So in the field, we're doing interpretations. This is a high impact, mushed up musket ball. And when Doug Scott looked at that under the microscope, because he did all the analysis of the individual balls for us, he said, wow, look at that. Look at that. You see that? That circular indention there? He said, what do you think that is? And I'm like, I really don't know, because I don't specialize, in musket balls. And what it is, does anyone have any idea? It's the ramrod. How cool is that? I mean, so I'm looking for musket balls to show me where people were in the field, right? To tell me their story. But the musket balls themselves have a story. Each one has a story to tell, and we're digging into that as well. This is a close-up of a few of the musket balls that we have. And this is all of the musket balls that we found. We have 32 musket balls, possibly 33. We're still analyzing that one that's just a fragment of lead that could have broken off of an actual musket ball. These are in plastic bags for a specific reason. So I again, to quote someone, Doug Scott, I love it, says, artifacts don't have opinions. Right? They don't. They've been dropped, lost, forgotten, buried in the ground. It's our responsibility as archaeologists to tell the story of that musket ball and not just use the musket ball to tell the story of the battle, someone was here and shot over there, but use that musket ball and look into that musket ball, focus even more closely on that musket ball to see what it might tell us. So in the plastic bags, we've preserved those musket balls. We haven't touched them with our hands. We used neoprene gloves. We have samples of the soil, and we're going to do protein analysis to see if there's any blood on the musket balls, to see if any of them actually hit a person or an animal, but I'm going to say a person, and they can probably tell that too with the analyses. So that's something that we're working on to see if we have any evidence of that and what story that might tell us. Because I know where each one of these came from the ground. I can go right back there and with my GPS and put it back in the ground if I needed to. But also what's interesting is, right, while we're really focused on musket balls, we also are finding wonderful representations of other parts of life in that time period. We have buttons, we have, right here, the 2 buttons, we have a shoe buckle, clay pipe bowl, which didn't have a metallic signature, but was actually in one of the holes when we were digging up an artifact that had a metallic signature. And we have some coins as well. So these are just really wonderful examples of some of the other things that are telling a little bit of the story about the people who lived in that area of the battlefield. So analyses. So we have the protein analysis we're doing. Doug Scott, again, with our volunteers in hand there, weighed all of our musket balls. Now we're weighing them because which musket balls are British and which musket balls are colonial, right? Because boy, wouldn't that be great to be able to say, well, these are the British and these are the colonial. So, you know, the British line was here and the colonial line was here and this is what they did. That answers questions 1 and 2 that I need to do for this project. Where is the battle and what was the action? So he's measured. He's weighed them. We can't really measure them because so many of them are squashed. So we can't actually figure out their circumference. So we're also doing X-ray fluorescence. So in an additional kind of bid to see, can we determine British and colonial musket balls, we're looking at their elemental composition. This is a bar graph of silver and rhodium. So we're getting the readouts of the elements of the lead, of the silver, of the aluminum, whatever's in those musket balls. They're kind of individual cocktails. And this is brand new research. I've called everyone I know who's working on this type of thing, and there are only 1 or 2 other people that are actually looking at Revolutionary War musket balls. So I'm trying to work with them. We're working with the manufacturer of the instrument, the tracer, it's called, the instrument that we're using for the X-ray fluorescence. And we're beginning a big study on, can we set a baseline, have a collection, and begin to differentiate between musket ball groupings based on their elemental composition. So again, we just finished field work and we're just beginning the analysis phase. So I'm really excited to see where that may take us. And then the final part of the field investigations, with all of this information that we have, right, it's a big job to interpret what happened. We've got all these musket balls, we have the old historic landscape, we're hopefully being able to determine a little bit of colonial, a little bit of the British musket balls. Well, how do we interpret that battle? So I don't have any military experience, and as I mentioned before, I'm not a very experienced battlefield archaeologist. And part of the project is engaging in our community, engaging the resources that are available to us. And so with the park, with Jim Hollister, who's one of the interpreters at the park, and knows like everything there possibly is to know about the first day of the American Revolution, he and I planned a military tactical review. And we invited 30 people from active military, historians, environmentalists, ecologists, archaeologists, conflict archaeologists, all the specialists and people that we had, materials experts, to come to the park for a day and a half to look at the evidence and then to come out with us and interpret it. And we did. So we met in the morning on what is this, on November 18th. Sorry, it was the 18th and 19th, not the 8th and 9th. And Jim, who's behind the podium, presented the primary documentation, the British resources that have been written, that were written by officers or by soldiers who are fighting there, and the primary documentation of the colonists. And there's very little, like almost none, that says anything about, we fought the Lexington Militia here, and this is what we did. There's nothing like that. So, but we have some reference to the fighting of that day. And so this is the map I gave them. We sent a packet out 2 weeks beforehand, and it's tough to see. Yeah, it's nice when it's blown up really huge. But this is this is Old Bay Road. It's that granite outcrop, you know, that 3D scan, we kind of flew here and up around here. This is the Tabitha Nelson house that we excavated. This is the bridge over that intermittent water feature here. And this is a gradual slope coming up here. So if I were to draw a contour, it would kind of come around this way. And I wasn't able to pass out maps to everyone before the event with the actual location of the musket balls, because I'm working under a federal ARPA permit from the Archaeology regional office, and we're not allowed to publicly share the position of the artifacts that we've located. Yet, at least, right? We're still in progress. But on that day, I was able to give them maps with the position of the 32 musket balls that we've identified with this survey. And you can see them all here. Now remember, this has been marked as the location of the battle. So we've moved the battle about 100 yards north. And does anyone see any patterning in those balls, in those dots? Yeah. Oh, how exciting, right? So we have these red. Red means British. So we're able to identify some of the musket balls as British from their weight, from their high caliber, and some of the musket balls as colonial, which are blue, from their low caliber, their low weight. And then the white musket balls, we don't know. Probably colonial, but we can't say right now because we're still analyzing things. So we have this kind of alignment, but a bit of a scatter of British-fired musket balls. And one dropped colonial musket ball. And then we have this, you can't see them all because they're overlapping on each other. They're so closely spaced together. Colonial-fired, don't know, maybe colonial-fired musket balls on that alignment. Well, wow. So for me, the real wow was we didn't find these musket balls until 3 days into our last week of metallic surveys. So prior to that week of November 9th, last month, we only had 12 musket balls. And we found another 20, thank goodness, in that week. Archaeological method, that's how we found them. So with the group, they have these maps in their hand. We went out to site. And on the day before, I went out with some of the volunteers again, and we put these great posts in with flags, British fired, colonial fired. You could see them across the site. It was a real visual setup. We had parking cones, bright orange, showing where the woodlot was. Bright orange parking cones at Tabitha Nelson's house and over at the bridge. So the participants coming from their background, and we had many different expertise there, could actually see the battlefield and see the evidence that we uncovered as part of this research. And boy, it was quite a day of walking around. First, we walked around from the colonial perspective. We came up over that granite outcrop and down across the landscape, and we were able to look out over Battle Road and begin to see the distribution of the musket balls. And everyone talked. Everyone had their own ideas of what happened. There are a lot of opinions up there, a lot of strong opinions. But what's happening is with the evidence that we've provided through archaeological investigations, because, right, the musket balls don't have an opinion. They're there. It's up to us and everyone in that group to think about what that tells us and to perhaps change a bit their perspective on what they've always assumed happened during that battle. And then we went back out after lunch, and we came from the British line. So the British column was coming toward this outcrop of bedrock into this almost right degree angle, turn in the road with a bridge. What a perfect setup, right? And we actually did some drilling on the road to understand how the speed at which the column would have been moving. And I have a video here.
I understand that.
But I still see what you mean. They could have put the flankers out,
Right.
brought them back,
And that's
put them out,
what
brought them back.
we were
Talking
talking
about
earlier about the
flankers.
notion of digging
British
into the history
flankers.
and seeing if we could tighten the chronology of British actions. Because if you can see slowdowns and speed. I don't even know if it's possible, the archival record. You could probably notice that what they're doing is instead of moving with a cohesive flankers, what they're doing is they're reacting as they hit pockets of resistance, not a solid wall of resistance. So as they hit pockets of resistance, they spread out, react, and keep moving. Spread out, react, and keep moving. They push it away.
Reconstruction.
Right.
So this was Patrick Jennings, who's based here in D.C. At the American Battlefield Protection Program, and he came up and kind of dove right in with this interpretation. And as you can see, he's not talking about the battle, who stood where and who shot what. He's talking about the tactics that the British would have used. So coming out of this evidence, it's not just the Parker's Revenge battle, but it's proposing, here's a new hypothesis. He called it the snake and the tennis ball, right? Because originally we thought the flankers, the light infantry, would be out on either side of that column, and their job was to push those colonists away so they wouldn't shoot on the column, so the column could just go back to Boston quickly, right, to get that resistance gone. But what Patrick was suggesting was you couldn't keep that going for the miles and miles, rough terrain, and really vicious firing. At this point, there are nearly 2,000 colonists, different militia groups and individuals that are on Battle Road, lining it, just here, just at coming up to Lexington, that are firing on that column and following that column. There's huge pressure on that back of the column, so it's got to keep moving. So part of what we're looking at is not only where do people fire from in our little battle, or one of the battles of that day, but how were the British moving and what tactics were they using against the colonists? So that's a hypothesis that hopefully we can begin to develop even more and then go out and try to prove on those other battle sites in the park. So this is a graphic to help you see the terrain a little bit, and this is our initial interpretation of what happened as part of the Parker's Revenge battle. We believe that Captain Parker's militia aligned here on this little finger of land that sticks out. So not on that big outcrop where it's signposted the battle was, but just down past that historic track that has a stone wall along the side of it, just here. And this is a contour. This is the slope that goes down toward Tabitha Nelson's house here, a slope going down toward that water feature. So we believe they were aligned there because from there, man, you have a clear shot straight down. This was all pasture in here. This is all meadow down in here. There was a woodlot. Oh, it's great. There's a woodlot coming right up here like this in 1775. Cover. There are a lot of big boulders up there, more cover, right? So they have the line of sight down Battle Road as the British approach, and they are constrained by the bridge. We have it probably at this point around 25 dead British soldiers and around 63 to 65 injured. So the injured would be on carts, right? How are they moving people? How are they moving the troops? It's not just a bunch of guys running down a road, right? There's much more to it than that. So we know that that bridge is a strategic point in the landscape, a tactical point. We believe that, as the infantry was panning out, they would have crossed the bridge and come out, maybe aligning along this water feature, that they were closely packed together, and that the colonial forces opened fire on them as they were just past that bridge, just beginning to come out and line up on that landscape. And then they beat it, right? The colonists, we're thinking, again, this is the very beginning of our interpretation, we're thinking they took a shot and they turned and ran. Because what we have is the British continuing to deploy. Once they reach the position they've been ordered to, they turn and they fire on the retreating colonists. And that is what the musket balls are telling us is what happened at the Parker's Revenge battle. And that is the end of my talk. This slide, and before I have two more slides, so that's really the end of the presentation, but I wanted to show you the impact. We have at least 1,250, if not 1,500 volunteer hours invested in this project. Without the volunteers, without the Friends group doing their amazing job with fundraising, without the support of the Society of Cincinnati, and without the support of the campaign 1776, none of this would have happened. And I'm truly grateful for that, and for these wonderful volunteers, both private citizens, both professional and academic. It's been an amazing project, and thank you, of course, to all of these groups and all of the people who have participated and supported our work. We're not yet done. We still have 2 phases left. But the archaeology part in April should be concluding with my final report. Thank you very much. Great. And I'll take some questions. What I'd like to do, though, is put it back here in case you didn't get to read. These are from 2 of our volunteers who have been involved from like the past 20 years in the park or more. And I just asked them to give me some feedback about what this project meant to them, that we were actually able to do it and that they could be a core part of it. So are there any questions? Yep.
Thank you so much for your interesting presentation. Could you please comment on the opposing forces who participated in this battle of Concord revenge 240 years ago? You mentioned earlier that colonial force dwindled from 77 to 57 after the first skirmish, but how much people were on the British side and how much? 55 people vanished?
Really good question. What are the numbers that we're talking about in the British regular column and the colonial militia column? So I'm going to start by saying there are around 700 in the British column at that point. We don't know how many colonial militia were there. We know in the morning on the Lexington Green there were 77, give or take 1 or 2. And 1 was from Woburn militia, 1 was from somewhere else, right, because they were all starting to come in. We don't believe 77 were out there for the battle with the British at the line of Lincoln and Lexington. The numbers I've heard, and there's no evidence for this that we've found yet, are 23, 55, probably not more than 55 or 60. And that's huge, right? These guys, 8 of them were killed in the morning. And there they are, like, what was it? If they were killed at 6 o'clock in the morning, we think they engaged around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe, right? That's crazy. You're you're taking care of the dead, you're taking care of the wounded, you've just committed treason, right? We don't know what the communication was between the North Bridge, Miriam's Corner, Bloody Angle, what's going on? Does Captain Parker and his men, do they even know what's going on that retreat? Surely they could have heard things. They would have seen the smoke coming. And I also believe strongly, and we're actually the curator of the Concord Museum, who is also collaborating with us, David Wood, he's been helping me learn more about the communication networks that were already established in that region. Paul Revere went out, boy, that word spread. There were 4,000 militia by the end of the day who descended, and they came to these strategic points where these battles took place, not just kind of wandering up onto the road, but really moving in a certain way. We have no documentary evidence that says anything about communications, lines of communication, but we expect there were people riding horses. We expect something was going on, but we don't know. Always we don't know. Yes?
I have a basketball question. Okay?
Yep.
So when I first looked at the layout of basketballs, I thought, why are the ones in a row? I would think those would represent the British. And the ones that are scattered represent the colonial forces.
Yes.
So that means that somebody shot at the British and somebody else shot, and all of them came in a row because that's the British order. But what I don't understand
Yep.
is, does that mean the musket ball flew through the air and actually hit a person? And if so, why is it there? Why isn't it in the person? Or the person dead?
Right. Great question about the musket balls and their positioning. And did the musket balls, when they were fired, did they hit people? Or did they just drop in, like why would they just drop into the ground? They're only, if we're defining two lines, let's say of people associated with these musket balls, they're only about 30 yards away from each other. Honestly, from me to the, a little bit past that back wall. Wow, that's crazy, man. I would have been running before I fired, but I wouldn't have been out there. But we don't have any specific record of anyone being killed at Parker's Revenge. One of the Lexington Militia died in the fighting. Was it Parker's Revenge? Was it Bloody Bluff? Was it Fisk Hill? They're all in that area. We don't see that's part of this whole, and that's why I love the volunteers who are involved, because they have just this extensive knowledge and archival research behind them, and they can pull out all this stuff and really provide good information. So partly, these guys are firing downhill, right? This is that gold topographic map that I had out there. This is where my analysis with the hard computing starts. If you're standing at this height, aiming your musket at this angle at someone that distance down there, where's that musket ball going to go? Right? So I can work backward from the musket ball, working with angles and stuff, right? So that's not very technical, but right? And I can begin to better identify or better locate, what's going on. And then the British were firing up into that hillside, so potentially they were even closer to each other than that alignment shows. They like right on top of each other potentially. And this is potentially like a skipped ball. It's, it would have skipped out past this line here. So that's why, and then we think with the spacing of these musket balls that they're the colonists that were retreating, that were running away, were more spaced out on that contour. But also we can look at the velocity impact of the musket balls, because some of these ricocheted, right? This was a woodlot from about here. This was a woodlot. So there were trees, there were rocks, there were all sorts of things. So we could have a number of ricocheted musket balls in there. So, the dropped musket ball, I propose that the dropped musket ball represents a colonial militia soldier dropped in the musket ball. He was there, standing there, loading his gun, running away, dropped a ball. There was a person right there. With the fired musket balls, I'm not ready to say that yet until we do a lot more analysis. We know that was the position of a line. And that's as far as we can go for now. Really good question, though. We actually talked about that. Sorry, we talked about that during the tactical event. Yep.
Yes, I would guess certainly that most of which I have not today. Which are smooth boards, they didn't tend to go through people, and because of the velocity. When you're talking about 35 yards, it's not all surprising because you get farther than 90 yards or whatever the smooth board, you're not going to hit it.
Yeah.
My question then would be, you were talking about the composition of these balls.
Yes.
Are these just all lead, or is there a difference in composition between, say, a colonial musket ball and a British musket ball?
Really good question. Asking about the X-ray fluorescence study that we're beginning to do, and do the British musket balls have a different composition of materials than the colonial musket balls? Again, this is another whole talk. The short answer is, I don't know. The longer answer is, at this time, there was maybe one lead mine in Virginia or West Virginia in the colonies. All the rest of the lead mines were in England or Wales, right? So the lead potential, and again, we're just beginning to research this. The lead is potentially all coming from the UK. Are the colonists using that lead to make smaller caliber balls because that fit their Fowlers, perhaps? They may be using slightly different muskets, but they may also be using the same muskets, right? Because let's not forget, they're all British. They've been there for a while, the colonists have. They have other arms that they're using, like the Fowlers. They're hunting the guns they used for hunting. We don't know. We do know in some, like, I think it's Monmouth battlefield from the Revolutionary War, I think it's this one, it could be a different one, where they melted down a pewter statue. And they've done analysis of musket balls that were found in that region. I'm totally bungling this. If there's anyone from the American Battlefield Group here, please feel free to correct me. But there have been some analyses done on musket balls that have identified a certain amount of pewter in them. So they're able to track that musket ball back to that potential happening of melting down the statue. But that's, again, we're really at the very beginning. We just don't know. I hope so. But there was just a workshop in Georgia this week, literally the first one ever, and I haven't heard the results yet, so. Yes? Mm-hmm.
One is, I thought people said earlier that there were estimates like 1,000 responders
Yes.
on the local side to all the skirmishes. Is there a list, centralized, comprehensive list of all those things?
Absolutely, yes. The question is there a comprehensive list of the colonial militia forces that turned out on that day to fight in those battles? And yes, there is. I don't know, but I can tell you later. I can look it up. Again, this is for better or worse. I've got my volunteers that I would call up and be like, "Hey, Joel, where's that list?" Mm-hmm.
Has any work that has been done anywhere else from Lexington Green, for example, or will that?
Another very good question that gets me really excited is, has any other work of this kind been done in the park or on the Lexington Green? And the answer is no, it hasn't. And what this project has done is proof of concept. It works. We can do this. What I've been introducing to the park over the last year or so is that while we're doing battlefield archaeology, we're looking at one very small isolated area. But that one small isolated area was part of a much larger action that took place that day. The actual battlefield from Concord, from the North Bridge back to Boston, that is a battlefield, right? So I know that the park is very interested in continuing this kind of investigation, and we are developing some hypotheses based on the tactical analysis of what we think the snake and the tennis ball type of thing, and saying that we think if this is indeed the tactics that were employed, we should be able to go to this battle site, say Bloody Angle, or Miriam's Corner, and we should be able to go right here after the bridge. We're going to start metal detecting here, and this is where we're going to find the musket balls, because that will prove our hypothesis that they were using the tennis ball snake tactical approach to as they approached and they encountered an obstacle, militia, they opened up, they swept them away, and then they collapsed again, and the flankers came back into the column, and they went out and they came back again, right? So we have a great, because as archaeologists, we like to have a hypothesis. You know, it's like I'd like to go out and actually base all of this research that we're doing on trying to answer a provable question. So hopefully, fingers crossed, got a lot of work ahead of us. Good? Great. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you all for attending tonight. I hope you join us in the Winter Garden for some refreshments. And on Friday at 12:30, we have a lunch bite on a reproduction 1st Rhode Island Regiment uniform, and talking a little bit about the African American experience in the Revolutionary War. So I hope you can join us Friday at 12:30. Thank you for attending.